Instead of needing to look up something on Google or finding a YouTube video, AI is starting to make this a lot easier and provide those answers for you. So while AI is also helping and making certain things stronger, like some of the endpoint detection responses we're seeing on the market, it's also making it easier for bad actors to get hands on the equipment needed to do harm.
They weasel into fertility and OBGYN systems like a parasite. They use your staff, they learn your systems, then they exploit you and your patients for money. And cyber attackers aren't just state-sponsored actors gunning for large healthcare companies. AI has made it easier for teenagers, anybody, to do big business damage. I looked for IT experts with fertility experience, and I found Chris Diamond and Jordan Spriegel, partners at One Stop IT. They're a full-service IT firm that helps with cybersecurity, EMR integrations, AI automation. Their decades of fertility experience is actually why Inside Reproductive Health uses One Stop IT for our IT needs. Chris and Jordan share how fertility centers protect themselves from these kind of risks, what the risks are, the right and wrong way to migrate EMRs, and what fertility centers are automating with AI right now. If you need IT help, you might talk to these guys. I'd be happy to make an intro or share my experience with you, or find them at thinkonestop.com. Enjoy this conversation with your IT experts, Chris Diamond and Jordan Spriegel from One Stop IT.
If you like the information in this episode, we're compiling so much more data on new technology in IVF, products, services, market analyses, info on mergers and acquisitions, and data on every company in the fertility space. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com. If your company isn't an IVF Heroes Universe sponsor, your competitors are so much more visible to your customers because we report on your category and we give that info to your customers. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com to learn more about other fertility companies or submit your company today. Don't be left out.
Today's episode is paid content from our feature sponsor, who helps Inside Reproductive Health to deliver information for free to you. Here, the advertiser has editorial control. Feature sponsorship is not an endorsement and does not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health.
The biggest dangers are typically a ransomware type of attacks where you let's just say hypothetically, you come in on a Monday morning, your staff get there, nothing's working, right? Computers are locked, your systems and data are all encrypted. You see a ransom note pop up on your screen. Essentially, you're locked out of your own world, right? And you cannot function. That's kind of like essentially worst case scenario, right? Where we've seen it in large companies and small. This is where we try to prevent and avoid things like that, and obviously prepare for them, right? Because sometimes it's inevitable. It's not, as they say, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So our job is covering all the bases to make sure it doesn't happen, but also be prepared to when it could happen, right? So it essentially in a modernized form of insurance, I guess you could say.
A matter of when, not of if. It's that common?
I would say so.
When I hear about ransomware attacks, I often hear about like large health systems. Is it as frequent with smaller businesses, less frequent? Tell me about that.
I would say less frequent for sure, because there's less to gain, but it can happen at any degree. I mean, we've seen both. Obviously, you see the large ones in the news, smaller ones you may not hear about as much, which are typically our clients, right? Most of our clients don't have internal IT, and if they do, they may have limited internal IT resources. So we supplement that. But the majority of them, it happens, I guess to answer your question, it happens at all sizes, right? And what makes them a target? Nobody really has a definitive answer to that, I don't think. But it's usually financial or some type of, retribution sort of thing.
So if you're smaller, you might have less to offer the potential attacker, but it's also likely that you have less defenses, right? Like it's like, who's going to steal my Toyota Camry? When there's all these Benzes and BMWs out there, but the Mercedes and the BMWs might have better security systems or be behind a gated community, and your Toyota Camry is sitting right there. Is it kind of like that with cybersecurity as well, where, yeah, the bigger ones might be targets because they've got deeper pockets, but you as a smaller entity might be an easier target?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there. Toyota Camry, yeah, not as glamorous, not as expensive, but maybe easier to steal, right? So if they can steal a dozen of those in a week versus one Mercedes may take them longer. So I think that's kind of similar, right? There's some attacks that might be easier to accomplish and check a box off for the bad guys, right? The bad actors. So they can say, hey, we hit X amount of clinics this month, and their ransom requests may be staggering, right? I mean, it could be just a small clinic that they may be requesting millions of dollars for, right, to recover the data. So the amount of damage is the same, right? It's really just like each company has its own tolerance level. So
Jordan, how are these attacks executed? Most of us don't know anything about cybersecurity or IT. So just talk to us about like how they're actually carried out.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. I mean, like Chris touched on earlier, social engineering tends to be a really big one. That's why having a strong security awareness training and things in mind to constantly test and make sure that your
What does social
employees.
engineering mean?
Social engineering would mean someone that's a bad actor who essentially is calling up and trying to essentially get someone to do something. That could be clicking on a link. It could be getting those spam emails where it looks like it's from your employer. There's a lot of these, and this is becoming a lot more common within the whole cybersecurity sphere. But then to also look at the other side, I mean, with AI, I mean, hacking is getting a lot easier for, those teenage kids that you hear hacking into NASA. Through AI, it's becoming easy to now do open port scans. With port scans, you can kind of figure out where you can get some vulnerability and kind of where some access can get in. From there, you can do some fingerprinting. That will allow you to pick up what kind of operating systems and what are on these devices. From there, you can then go look at the National Institute of Security Standards and Technologies, and you can go look at the Common Vulnerability Exchange and find specific flaws for that operating system. Hacking isn't always done by, state-sponsored actors. Sometimes it's just a 13-year-old kid in the basement seeing what he can do.
And seems like that's getting easier. Why? Because of AI? Like they're using Claude to do this, or why is it getting easier?
I mean, technology is getting easier to access. I mean, instead of needing to look up something on Google or finding a YouTube video, I mean, AI is starting to make this a lot easier and provide those answers for you. So while AI is also helping and making certain things stronger, like some of the endpoint detection responses we're seeing on the market, it's also making it easier for bad actors to get hands on the equipment needed to do harm.
Is social engineering the same as phishing?
To an extent, yes. There's different kinds of phishing, and some are just like terms. Like, for example, whaling would be a method of phishing where you're specifically going after larger or high value clients. So phishing is essentially a piece of social engineering.
Before you pull one fish in, hook, line, and sinker, instead you use it as bait to catch a bigger fish? Is that what whaling is, or do I have that
It's
wrong?
almost just more defined targeted phishing. For example, I mean, there's lots of tools like Apollo or Zoom Info where you could pay or look up companies to get certain people's information. Now actors are using these tools to help target and do some of that social engineering to get information within a company that most people wouldn't know to look.
Is phishing getting better with AI right now? Because I'm terrified that it's going to get so good in a couple years. Like right now, very often you can tell if you're using common sense, this is a phishing scam. I think in some years' time that it will seem really authentic. Like if you have AI bots that can crawl social media and do other things, then it could send and do deep fakes instead. It could send a voice message from a spoofed text message in Chris's voice saying, "Oh, hey, Griff, back when we were at the MRSI conference, I left this thing in Nikki's office. Can you text me that?" Like it will have context for who we know, where we've been, what we've done. Are we there with phishing right now, or how close are we to something like that?
yeah, I think it's very sophisticated to answer your question, and it's only getting better as you've seen. I mean, there's SMS components, like you'll be surprised. And I think going back to the whaling comment, I want to say I'm not the expert in that, but whaling I think typically is going after CFOs, CEOs, business owners like you, Griffin. Typically, they get a hold of your. Jordan was mentioning Zoom Info. It's a public thing you can sign up for and get everybody in every company, right? So they target the whales of the company, thinking, they can get you've seen simple SMS I've seen CEOs of large companies get an SMS from somebody saying, hey, I need to wire me money or something. And it gets to the point where you think it's real and you get almost to the point, and sometimes it's actually executed and hopefully it gets caught beforehand. But you'd be surprised when people are very busy, they get taken advantage of a little bit easier, I think. And that's kind of why these things happen, right? Where it's, I was at a staffing company years ago, and we did, I'm just giving an example. We did transactions via paper check with a large customer. They paid us millions every month, and one of our employees got phished in an email, and they not only get in there, but they monitor you and learn your behavior for about a month or two. She was being monitored, and finally they reached out on her behalf to the client and said, hey, effective next month, we're not doing paper checks. Wire the money to this account, right? And it was, of course, an offshore account, and it took us about 2 months to realize it even happened because the customer and the money went missing and whatnot. So these things are calculated typically, and targets are established, and they do a lot of due diligence. It's not just like, hey, we're just going to throw a big net out there, right? And I think AI is making their lives easier to do this in a larger scale. So that's the scary part.
And then what's an open port scan?
That's kind of getting into nitty gritty, but a port is essentially a piece within the network that a certain type of information will transfer through. So to look at it on a broad scale, HTTP for web browsing, that's often considered port 80. Well, port 80 doesn't encrypt traffic. So if you're only using HTTP, if someone is technically in your network or monitoring it, then they can kind of see some of that traffic that's going through. That was replaced by HTTPS, which is now port 443. As there's more applications and more types of data to be transferred, there's more ports. So as an example, some of the traffic that flows through the application of Facebook will have its own port number. And the type of traffic can have certain types of vulnerabilities that people can exploit within a system.
And then what's fingerprinting?
Fingerprinting is essentially using tools to send signals to kind of be able to pull information on devices. If you're able to ping and do scans within a network, you can often decide and see what other devices are on it, what the operating system it's running. Through that, fingerprinting is essentially just gathering all of that information to be able to find other points of vectors you can attack on.
The cybersecurity attack a couple years ago, Change Healthcare. What happened with that?
Yeah, so that one was they're large, obviously claims provider. So I was working at a DSO back then, dental service org, and they, essentially we used them to process claims. So as secure as our posture was security wise, I mean that was a big disruption. That's a vendor, right? Your close partnership. They do a lot of transactions for you. They keep the lights on, so to speak. So that was kind of a awakening moment for a lot of executives and companies to realize, like, hey, a single point of failure like that can stop revenue from coming into my front door for X amount of days or weeks, right? And that's exactly what happened. So you kind of start scrambling to see, like, hey, how can we process claims without these guys, and what steps do we have to take? So really fast course correction, but also can be devastating, right, to a company.
I know I'm asking you guys to Monday morning quarterback that situation. It's not like you were there and you know everything, but what do you think happened?
It was a long road to recovery for them. And I've probably seen a couple of those per month when I was running that IT department there, because there was just so much happening. All the vendors and partners, some of them onshore, some of them offshore, but essentially, that's where the posture comes in, right? You have to have a game plan in place, and that's where a lot of people fail, where it's like, hey, we just got a new firewall, we're good to go. It's not the case. There's so many moving parts, and that fertility specifically has a lot of moving parts, and the clinics hold a unique set of data that could be potentially devastating for the patients and the practice, right? So especially when you have all the laws around HIPAA and things like that, compliance stuff that has to be followed. So the risk there is pretty tremendous in the fertility realm.
Is there a common denominator between those attacks that you saw, that it's often one thing or one category of things that people either didn't have in place or had the wrong thing in place?
Common denominator is not having a pulse on everything. That's the hardest thing to explain to executives, where they're like, oh, we spent millions on cyber software, we spend millions on consultants, we spend millions on this, that, the other. But you know what? You need to have a team or representatives having a pulse on everything. And I think that's where some people, or a lot of people, fail, because it's kind of like the Murphy's Law, right? You've checked all these boxes that are like common threats, and then boom, you saw the recent one with Stryker, right? Stryker was huge medical supplier. I mean, they used Microsoft, tens of thousands of employees. There's a product in Microsoft called Intune, which is meant to make IT guys' lives easier. They manage all your endpoints, laptops, tablets, cell phones, you name it, right? Administrative credentials were gained somehow. I don't remember how, but somebody got a hold of that. Wake up the next morning, every computer was wiped. All the employees, computers were wiped. Nobody could work, right? So it's things like that where you're doing audits of your vendors. Obviously you're following HIPAA as much as you can, but you need to keep a pulse on what everybody's doing that you're sharing information with, right?
How do you possibly keep a pulse on all that? Like, I'm sure they thought they were keeping a pulse. Like, how do you possibly?
It's not easy, but it's conversation driven, and that's where you come in, you do an assessment. You're like, all right, let's again check all the boxes off. You have old network technology, we update it. We get you, endpoint management, endpoint detection and response. We get everything up to snuff technically, but then we have to dig into policies, procedures. Who are you sharing data with? There's integrations that especially nowadays with private equities buying another practice, you're inheriting things that you don't even know about, right? There's databases, there's transactions happening behind the scenes, especially in that embryology lab, right, which is like the heart of an IVF clinic. It's probably the least IT governed section of a business, right? Because there's lab equipment vendors that control the software. There's barely any updates that happen. There's no network segmentation. So, things get crossed in. So, and if a cyber attack hits that, it could turn off the lights for a lot of things, right? And that happens quite a bit in other verticals, but it's devastating it can be to fertility and healthcare, right? Especially if it's a hospital environment or that has critical systems at play.
As more hardware comes into the picture, does that introduce more risk? Like, I was reading about cyber attack in the Wall Street Journal. It was actually an RIT, a Rochester Institute of Technology student, that cracked the case. And you guys will probably think that I'm butchering this because I am, but it was something like they were hacking into things like smart picture frames and using that to like hack into other devices or like launch attacks from other devices. I know I'm butchering it, but is that risk at play as well? Now we have like really smart ultrasound machines, and we have 3D ultrasound probes, and we have time-lapse incubators, we have electronic witnessing. Like, as there's smarter technology in the labs and in the clinics, are those potential entry points for attacks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say 1000% yes, because they do look for the weakest vulnerable piece of hardware, software in the organization, right? So oftentimes, like in a lab environment, in a manufacturing environment, you have little logic boards on a machinery. But if they are tied to the network, I mean, yes, that's basically an origin, right? That's how they're going to get into your network, and then from that point on, it's almost too late, right? Anything's kind of open game for them to access. So that's why if you've heard of IoT, like in your home or business environment, they have IoT networks. So basically, if you have like an Alexa device, which can be easily hacked, right? You want to keep that on a separate network where it can get to the internet, but it can't get to your server or your personal files or whatever. There's that segregation piece, which is important.
You guys have some decent experience working with fertility centers, and I should also share that you provide IT services for Inside Reproductive Health, and that's part of the reason why I'm interested in talking to you, is because you've done a good job for us in taking care and showing us different blind spots and things that we were struggling with that we're not seeing any bit like we were because of you guys. So, I'm biased towards you guys because you've helped us, but you've also had some experience with fertility centers. What's your kind of approach with them? Like, when you're starting to work with a new fertility center, what's the first things that you do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we do an assessment of their tech stack is probably the easiest, right? That's the immediate thing. And from that point on, you kind of dig into it a little bit more, with such as like doing a security risk analysis, looking at who they do business with, who's data shared with. Like I mentioned in the embryology lab, I mean, there's tons of equipment that shares data, sends patient results back to certain other companies and third-party cloud systems and whatnot. So all of that, I mean, you kind of just have to set the baseline and understand what's happening in the environment, right? And then you kind of start digging into it piece by piece and understanding. And I'm a big fan of least privilege. I mean, it's a common theme, right, in cyber where everybody says you get access to what you need. So a lot of companies just may have an on-premise EMR that has a database that a vendor has access to, but they may have way too many privileges, right? So you kind of evaluate all that and start locking it down as best you can. And the most difficult part is doing this while the business is operational, because you can't be too intrusive. Because if you start locking people out of their systems and clinicians can't do their job, and then it kind of becomes messy. But so it has to be carefully approached, I guess.
Tell me about that implementation of least privilege, because there are things where we think we are following least privilege, and then it's like, who has access to that? And you all helped us see some of that too. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean it's easily uncovered. The most outlining all the tech that's at play, right? All the software partners, all the vendors you're working with, everyone you're sharing data with, and in a medical environment that's quite a few people, right? Because you're oftentimes outsourcing claims and you're sending all this patient data to a claims person that maybe overseas and whatnot. So really just understanding what's happening and documenting it, and then spending the time to analyze. And you can use AI tools for this as well, but you can get into each system there and just kind of run some basic reports and say, here's all the people that have full admin rights. Do they need these admin rights, right? And you start scaling them back slowly. And then here's all the data you're sending to this vendor. Does it need to go to that vendor? So you start scaling that back, right? And then you get to a point where it's like, hey, we're sharing the data that needs to be shared and nothing beyond that. And then you're in a much better place, right? And then from that point on, it's really, as I mentioned, the if and when. I mean, when it happens, you want to be prepared, right? So we try to do multiple air gap backups. Jordan can probably speak on this more, but our cyber insurance policies kind of demand that we do that for our customers for these reasons, right? So you want to have air gap backups, because if it does happen, and it may not necessarily be something that we're in control of. It could be a vendor that has a direct connection to a patient, a clinic's network that ultimately gets breached, and then we have to clean up the mess. So we want to be prepared and have the backups ready and make sure we test the backups. And here's how long it's going to take to get back on your feet, and then sit down and have these exercises and discussions with the leadership team. So
what are those what did you say, air gap?
Yeah, Jordan can speak on that a little.
What are those, Jordan, and what is the underlying problem that they solve?
An air gap backup essentially just means a form of backup that is not able to be editable. So once that backup is in place, there are certain methods in place that will prevent it from being able to continuously copy more data backups. The reason for this is, if you were to get ransomware and then, you continue to back it up, well, now your backup is also going to be triggered and is no good. One of the most common misconceptions we see when dealing with backups is that people will often think just because it's in the cloud that they are safe. That is not the case. You still want your cloud backups to be irreputable and not editable. So you just really need to look at the big picture. Also, you got to make sure too that your cloud storage is being backed up elsewhere. I mean, you have to look at the disaster recovery piece. If there's a natural disaster that happens in Florida, at a data center in Florida where all of your information's kept, and a hurricane comes and that data center gets wiped out, well, if they don't have a disaster recovery place that's geologically separate, I mean, there's a chance that they could lose your information.
We've been talking about EMRs a bit. When I think of EMRs, this might be my own ignorance, but I think of any sort of technical support coming from the EMR company. Why are people going to you for support with their EMR?
Well, yeah, I mean so they're highly specialized systems, right? I mean, we all know there's quite a few out there, and fertility especially, they're not general purpose. They're very specifically built for that practice. So typically when you stand up an EMR, I mean, beyond the training and getting people to using it is not the difficult part. It's really the integrations. So there's, in fertility, there's like a whole ecosystem, right? Where you have multiple data streams. Everything needs to talk to each other, lab systems, billing, patient portals, pharmacy, genetic testing. I mean, there's tomorrow tanks, right, that are now in fertility. So there's all these different data things happening. And some of these EMRs do a good job and some of them don't. So it really, you need a representation at the clinic level, because the EMR companies, who do you think they're protecting, right? They're just protecting themselves. And I mean, they do best effort to protect the patient data. And if it's in their cloud, they're responsible for that piece of it. But, there's people in your clinic at your location, maybe staff even working remotely, that are accessing this data. So it's moving around quite a bit. So you have to have eyes and controls in place at different levels.
You guys want to burn any bridges here on Inside Reproductive Health and tell us which EMRs are good and which aren't?
Not sure we could do that. I don't know if I want targets on my back.
Well, then tell us what specifically makes an EMR good in these regards and what the poor ones do.
My professional opinion, since I've been doing this, I have 20 years experience in fertility. So just throwing it out there, hence the gray hair on my head. It's not so much the product, it's the people behind it, because there's a lot of great products that are released and then companies will say, oh, we just sold this beautiful EMR to a new company. That new company says, all right, we're just going to sell the crap out of it and just refine it minimally. To me, what makes a good EMR is the people that are behind it, and I've had a lot of good stories I can share with you, but people that are like, hey, we started out small, now we're growing like crazy, but we need all these features, we need these improvements, we need these security components, we need all these integrations. And then you work with that EMR vendor to accomplish what the business needs, what your IT guy, which would be us, needs to keep you safe and secure, to make sure the operations are running. You know what I mean? So it goes beyond the product. It's really more about the relationship to me, not just buying an off-the-shelf EMR and just be like, hey, plug it in and away you go.
What are the issues that people are coming to you with regard to EMR migration?
Well, I mean, the first, depending on the size of the practice, of course, there's always the build versus buy, right? That's all executives, are looking at that. Now, it's case by case, right? Every clinic, there's some very large entities out there that are private equity held, where they can afford to do more and better, and they want that brand recognition. They want their own EMR. They can go out and do it and spend a fortune. For the most of our customers are smaller, so they're looking for operationally what's going to be the best, what's going to be easy to use, easy to manage, easy to secure, easy for us to support. So there's kind of a different field depending on who you speak to out there, I guess. Larger entities will have different requirements because they're, looking to buy and acquire and merge. And so they want a product that may allow other EMRs to integrate into, and so they could do migrations easier, right? Where other smaller standalone clinics may just be like, hey, we want the easiest product to use. We don't want to spend a fortune on it. We're not going to use all the bells and whistles of it. So depending on how busy and how large the laboratories are and all these moving factors.
I know the EMR companies will have points of view on migration. There's a couple rising stars. I think Blumic might be a rising star in the EMR space, and we might want to do some coverage on their point of view on migration. But is there a right way and a wrong way to do it as far as you can tell?
There's no right or wrong. It's really just planning and being able to be nimble in the execution of it. So there's always going to be things that, you could plan for weeks and weeks and weeks, but something's going to throw you for a loop, right? And making sure you understand all the intricate parts of the clinic that may not be documented. That's the biggest thing we see, is lack of documentation, where it's like the previous guy or the previous vendor just came in, set it up and left. So nobody knows how it works or when it was set up or how it's secured or things like that. So you have to understand all that before you go out and rip something out and change it.
You look like you have something to add to that, Jordan. When I asked if there was a right way or a wrong way, you were kind of nodding your head. What were you thinking?
Just thinking that there can definitely be wrong ways, but Chris hit the nail on the head. I mean, really planning is the most important piece of it. I mean, you just got to make sure that you know kind of what's expected during the change.
I was speaking with one fertility physician who is very tech savvy, and this individual was thinking that there can be, or maybe there will be in the near future, a way to migrate almost seamlessly. And the conversation started that it doesn't matter if the best EMR comes out tomorrow, nobody's going to switch to it if they just switched EMRs, right? Like if you just switch EMRs, you're staying put for 5-10 years, maybe more. And it's just too painful of a process. And this individual's perspective was, well, you might be able to
reverse engineer the API of each of the EMRs and just push a button and there's your migration. I'm very skeptical that that's possible. I don't know anything about coding. How close to that is it reality or complete wishful thinking?
So
AI experts will tell you about 2 years for agentic AI, which is AI being able to automate specific tasks like that. For a migration like that, essentially, AI would be able to read what's within the pages and match field to then migrate the data. Because if you're ever looking at any migration, you're typically taking data sets with rows and identifiers and then importing it from one system to another.
and I would
Do you think it's possible today though? Like, could you do it with Claude and maybe like a couple developers? Can you reverse engineer the API of two different EMRs and press a button and have almost instant migration?
You could, I mean, with the right keys, you could almost build out anything per se. You just need to make sure that you have the right access to both systems, or at least know kind of how that data is stored and how it's formatted. And
I think the
essentially,
biggest hurdle is not technological, Griffin. It's the fact that the one EMR vendor doesn't want you to leave that easily, right? If it becomes that open source where you could hop around, it's probably not going to be good for anyone. Yeah, but I do agree AI is going to make it easier, but there are challenges. Like you said, if it's a cloud-based system, you don't have the keys to that server, right? Whereas like some of the legacy traditional EMRs are sitting on a SQL server in a closet or in a company controlled data center where your IT guys can just go in there and grab the database and plug it into another one. It's definitely easier. So um and discussions, it sounds easy, but it just, the execution of it is never simple.
It's never as easy as it sounds. It's
Right.
never as easy as you want it to be anyway. We've been talking a lot about IT from the business owner's perspective, but how can IT support make life easier for doctors, for managers, for nurses, like people that don't own the business but just work in it?
That's a good question. I mean, so, before AI, we called it digital transformation, right? And I think AI just put a new twist on it, but essentially, there's still quite a few clinics out there that operate on some paper charts to some degree. So I think getting to that level and kind of, again, doing a baseline analysis of where that clinic's at, right? How tech savvy are they today? And there's a lot of moving parts in the clinic, right? From the front desk checking in and automating the whole patient experience from start to finish, I think is way beyond an EMR. I mean, a lot of EMRs will try to say, hey, we have all these modules incorporated, but in reality, what's happening in a 2,000 square foot clinic, maybe a 20,000 square foot clinic may be way different, right? So you have to kind of understand the workflow, and operationally I think we work closely with operations leaders to understand that a little bit more. And obviously one of my passions is working directly with the clinical and lab leadership and understanding the workflows in the clinic and the lab, so you can not just throw a piece of technology at them and say, here, we think it's going to stick to the wall, just go use it. But we have to be careful on that. And I've seen a lot of horror stories going back to the cyber thing where some startup clinics are using Slack, the free version of Slack, which is not HIPAA compliant, which they may not know or may not care. Ultimately, when something goes wrong, you're going to be in trouble. So I don't think anybody wants that publicity or tarnish on their name, right? So we have to educate people as best we can from all levels. Doctors, front desk people, it doesn't matter. We treat them all the same.
What are people asking your help for with regard to AI?
how can we utilize it? Everyone wants to know. AI is such a big buzzword right now, and I want to say confidently that not everyone even fully knows what the term AI means. Like, yes, it means artificial intelligence, but how does it actually play into a business, and how is it actually beneficial? And the easiest way I would tell people a response to that would be think of a specific task. The more specific, the better. And think of how that can be automated. If you look at it piece by piece, then that typically will make it better. But AI is essentially, how can I automate a piece of this, of my workflow?
What are you seeing? What do you think can be automated that people are missing out on right now?
Again, it's going back, like Jordan kind of touched on, is that you're trying to solve a problem. I guess, when we hear people, doctors, business owners say we want AI, it's like, all right, what are your biggest pain points? Like, what are we trying to do? So a lot of them, there's good phone systems out there now that have great AI capabilities that interface well with EMRs and other systems. So we could say, our front desk girls are so busy, they don't answer all the calls. All right, here's a cool AI platform that's going to help you automate the reception as part of it. It's going to catch the patient's sentiment if the patient's in the middle of a procedure and they're in a bad mood, right? They don't want to be on hold for a while. So there's an AI phone platform that can capture that sentiment and say, all right, this person just moved up the food chain. They're extremely annoyed. They need to get through to a human right now, right? So those are simple things like we can layer into a business to help the business, and it's not super complicated, right? Or it's not just saying we're going to put AI into the back of your EMR. It's really just like phone system, checkbox, boom, you got AI capability. What else are we trying to solve? Like to automate certain components of it, and then everybody gets a feel for AI because of the buzzword that's out there, and they get the firsthand, experience with it.
What do you think fertility centers should do if they are realizing, okay, I'm probably a little bit more exposed than I'd like to be? What's the first step they should take?
Yeah, the first thing to do is just have a conversation, kind of understand like what, where do you feel you're at? And then do you have documentation? Like, is there any policies that there's so many moving parts, and that's the part that boggles us a little bit is, the stuff I've seen where you have really smart security and IT guys go in there and like we lock down the Microsoft environment and everything's HIPAA compliant. But then I personally have seen nurses that are extremely busy in a 10, 12-hour workday. They go to send an email to Mary Jo. Well, guess what? We saw 20 Mary Joes this month in the clinic. They send the wrong Mary Jo patient, the results, right? Or whatever. Some HIPAA breach happens just by the autocorrect or the autocomplete feature in Microsoft Outlook, right? So you're like, oh crap, now I got to shut that off and kind of educate people like, hey, be extremely cautious when you're sending an email. Don't just type the first Mary Jo that pops up. All these little caveats that will improve your business, and educating your staff, I guess, is the most important thing, right? Where it's like, hey, keep an eye out for these little things that can catch you and bite you.
How can people get a hold of you guys?
They can contact us through the website, thinkonestop.com. They could just give us a call, 772-663-7867. They could send us a message on LinkedIn or Facebook, but the best ways would either be visit our website and contact us, email us at info@thinkonestop.com, or give us a call. We actually have a cool abbreviation. It's 772-1-STOP.
And if people can't remember 772-1-STOP, they can email me. I'll be happy to make the intro. And I look forward to having both of you back on as more cybersecurity issues come into the news, as more people start to tell me EMR things that I don't think can actually happen. I'll bring you all on. I appreciate you being our IT experts today.
Yeah, thank you
thanks
for having us.
We appreciate it.
Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com. That's where we're compiling so much data on new technology in IVF, products and services, market analyses, info and mergers and acquisitions, every data point that we can on the field writ large and the companies in the fertility field, we're compiling there. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com as we build that over time. And if your company isn't an IVF Heroes Universe sponsorship, your competitors are getting more visibility because we report on your category and we give that to your customers. We do that multiple times per year, and we do it around big events like ASRM and ESHRE. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com and submit your company today. Don't be left out.
Today's episode is paid content from our feature sponsor, who helps Inside Reproductive Health to deliver information for free to you. Here, the advertiser has editorial control. Feature sponsorship is not an endorsement and does not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.